Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on reducing price promotions. I'm Maddie Bierce from Castora's marketing team, and I'm really excited to be here today with Jordan Elkin, our head of product management at Castora. Here's our lovely photo of him.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. Thanks, Maddie.
You're welcome. So we do these webinars about twice a month, and we really try to make them on topics that you guys tell us you're interested in. So reducing promotions has been something that our customers and retailers we speak to regularly have told us is a challenge that they're really trying to work on, especially during the holiday season. I know it's a little late for this holiday season, but we hope we give you some ideas today that you can take into 2019, especially to keep some of the customers that you've acquired during the holidays this year coming back next year. So as always, please chat your questions into the GoToWebinar window and we will answer them at the end. If we don't get to your question, we will definitely follow up via email. And as always, we'll share the deck and the recording after the webinar. So if not today, then definitely by tomorrow morning. So with that out of the way, I'm going to pass it over to Jordan.
Great. Thank you, Maddie. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar today. This is one of my personal favorite topics to be talking about, how to wean off of our reliance on price promotions and discounting. Absolutely essential for the retail community and probably a topic that's top of mind around this time of year. First, just an obligatory elevator pitch on who we are at Castora and what we're trying to do in the retail space. Castora is the leading customer intelligence platform built to help retail marketers grow customer lifetime value. You will see, looking at the page here, we specialize in retail. It is in our DNA. We have the great privilege of working with 7 of the 20 top US retailers, spanning all the way from publicly traded global retailers down to fast-growing e-commerce startups. What all of these retailers have in common is a few things. Number one, they are obsessed with organizing their business around their customers, breaking out of the old way of doing business, which was driven primarily by product and channel mentality. And they're also really struggling to do that. They have more customer data than ever before, but that data typically lives across multiple silos. It's difficult to unify into customer profiles and tease out meaningful insights about how to communicate with customers. And so Castora, that is our mission statement to solve those problems. We bring together disparate sources of customer data, transactional, CRM type data, web analytics, email engagement. We cleanse and organize it into customer profiles. We then run a suite of predictive machine learning powered models to understand how individual customers are likely to engage with the brand in the future. Everything from customer lifetime value to product affinities, discount sensitivity, which we'll speak about in just a bit, and much more. And we make those insights available to the marketing team to power more relevant communication with their customers and to help the organization make better, more customer-centric business decisions. So it is our great pleasure to work with many of the exciting retailers listed here. Okay, so now that we got the elevator pitch out of the way, it's time for a quick pop quiz. Easing into the pool here, and we talk about promotions. In 2016, what percentage of orders were sold on promotion? The options here range from a low of 13% all the way up to a high of 44%. We'll give you a few moments to think it over, think about your business and level of promotionality, and then key in your response. Oh, got some late entrants coming in here. The answers are trickling in. I must tell you, it is very, very fun to be in the driver's seat on these webinars and see the numbers changing in real time. Yeah.
All right, should we close?
Let's lock it down. Okay, so it looks like we kind of ranked here in order with the smallest number of customers or respondents. In fact, 0% falling for the mere 13% promotional. That's good. That's not the correct answer. So nice intuition there. The vast majority, 2/3 of you actually cited 44% as the percentage of orders that were sold on promotion. And I'm pleased, but also a little bit dismayed to reveal that that is in fact the correct answer. So nearly half of all orders in the retail space in 2016 were sold on promotion. We update the numbers here as industry data filters in, and I actually have very little doubt as we update this for 2017 and for 2018 that we'll see that trend continuing with a higher and higher percentage of orders that were sold with promotional incentives. Beyond that, so when we talk about promotions, we're talking specifically about kind of order level discounting, things like a friend and family sale, discount code. When we factor in additional promotional tactics around moving merchandise, specifically when merchandise is reduced from full price to markdown, the percentage of orders that are sold at less than full price actually increases quite a bit to 2/3. So 2/3 essentially of orders were not sold at full price when we factor in those markdowns. That is a lot of discounting. Just a reminder of what we all know, which is why we're here today, that this is incredibly prevalent in the retail community and growing at a rapid clip. We often rely on industry analysis from some of our friends over at McKinsey and other management consulting firms. A recent study looking at the incidence of promotions and price discounting actually was able to quantify the value that this stripped away from retail commerce in North America in 2016. As a result of all this promotional behavior, there was actually a 24% overall reduction in gross margin. And this makes sense when you think about the unit economics. I think we've got a nice stat here a little bit, not to beat a dead horse since we all know this, but when we begin chipping away at our MSRP and whether it's markdown or price promotion, a decrease of just 1% in average prices has a disproportionate impact on operating profits. So some nice research benchmarking across the entire retail space showing that 1% decrease in average prices, loss of pricing power because of competitive pressures and other factors that we'll dive into shortly, erodes overall operating profits by 8%. We did not run a fancy study of this the way that McKinsey did, but Maddie and I ran an informal study by looking at the incidence of common search terms. My mother has definitely contributed mightily to this one here, but even basic kind of promotional searches like discount code. And the results probably surprised no one here that we see a couple of factors. Number one, the pronounced spikiness will resonate instantly with any retailers of highly seasonal businesses on the phone, giftables, anything of that nature. We tend to see a tremendous spike in discount searches around holiday time, peaking kind of in the window between, let's say, Black Friday and last chance shipping cutoff. But beyond the kind of micro spikes that we're seeing, there's the long upward trend over time of increased discount seeking behavior. So it is now, and perhaps we recognize this behavior in ourselves as consumers, it's now kind of the default when we get to that checkout page, check to see if there's a discount available. And so this is what we're up against. Discounting that has taken a tremendous toll on the economic performance and valuation of companies is responsible for an increasing percent of sales and orders, and is becoming more and more deeply ingrained in the consumer psyche. Oops. Jumping ahead, I just can't wait to dive into the dangers of discounting. But and again, I recognize this is somewhat pedantic for those on the phone, but the dangers of discounting, well understood, I would imagine, by everyone here today. In the most obvious sense, it reduces margins. So given the choice between a full price sale and a discounted sale, the discounted sale eats directly into the bottom line. So there's a short-term impact on overall profitability. For companies that are in pedal to the metal growth mode, early stage startups, new retail concepts, that might perhaps be less relevant. They're prioritizing revenue growth. But for companies that are operating in a saturated, mature industry, steady state, the margin conservation and discipline is a really important part of marketing efficiency. And so we hear very often a concern, even just in the short term, I'm giving away unnecessary margin in order to drive those sales. Secondly, as we saw from our very scientific study of Google search behavior over time, there is behavior that becomes ingrained over time, psychological anchoring, where customers increasingly have come to expect discounts. We call this the Joseph A. Bank phenomenon for those who are customers of the menswear retailer. But essentially, promotions beget promotions. We'll show a nice infographic on this in just a sec, explaining kind of the vicious cycle. But really the end game of all of this, whoops, sorry, I got a trigger finger today, is long-term devaluation of the brand to the point where price becomes the only reference point for making a decision. And all of the great investments that we make in brand creative, brand equity kind of slip into the background. Our friends over at Smile came up with a really great kind of sequential infographic here showing the death spiral that is probably intuitively familiar to many of the folks on the phone today. For various reasons, which we'll dive into in just a sec, brands are often under pressure to drive a short-term increase in sales, which leads to a one-time usage of a promo. So a totally non-promotional brand, it drops a 10% discount and suddenly sees that sales are getting juiced. And that leads to this kind of euphoric high, right? Revenue responds in the short term. Unfortunately, customers quickly become habituated and begin expecting this discount to the point where unless we replicate the discount behavior, we actually see a drop in sales. Which just leads to more discounting, in fact, frequent bigger sales. And over time, we enter into this vicious circle where we have to keep running faster and faster on the treadmill just to stay in place. We have to keep cutting deeper and deeper, 40%, 45%, 50%. And it's really a one-way ratchet. For evidence of the challenges associated with pulling back from promotions, we typically point to examples like JCPenney, a great retail concept led by a strong, seasoned retail leader looking to transition from a price promotionally oriented concept to an everyday low price concept. But because of the habituation of their customers to have promotion seeking and discount seeking, found that it was much more difficult than anticipated to make that shift. So now that we've slapped ourselves on the hand for all the reasons that discounting is bad, it's probably worth pausing for a second on why even for super customer-centric, responsible practitioners of CRM, it can be seductive to discount. Because it's not always just about juicing sales. And in fact, if we were to show you a graph like this, this is kind of culled from Castora's library repository of information on the retail industry here. If we were to look at the likelihood of a customer coming back to make an additional purchase after their first experience with the brand, after their first transaction, after their second transaction, after their third transaction, what you would see is something like this. And I guarantee with 100% certainty that each and every one of your businesses looks exactly this way. If you were to look at your customers and their likelihood of repeat purchase by number of historical transactions that they've made, it would almost certainly follow this pattern, at least directionally. And so, intelligent people looking at this data might very well be led to the conclusion, man, if we could just get people over that one purchase hurdle, get them to make that second purchase, we would actually dramatically increase the likelihood that they would come back and make a third purchase and a fourth purchase. And that can even lead down the road of, hey, what if we kind of give them a little boost over that second purchase hurdle? What if we juice the likelihood of them coming back with a bounce back offer or some kind of promotional incentive? And it's a very sensible conclusion to reach after looking at the data here. Unfortunately, what we tend to see is that it doesn't work very well in practice. In fact, the argument that we would make looking at data like this for virtually any retailer is that what we're seeing is largely an artifact of self-selection. Namely, you think about two different types of customers in your customer base: those who have a high propensity to make a repeat purchase with your brand, and those who have a low propensity to make a repeat purchase with your brand. Those customers who have that high propensity are the ones who are likely to go on and make a second purchase. And because they're acting on their innate propensity for a brand, they're also more likely to go on and make purchase number 3 and purchase number 4. Conversely, customers who don't really have much of an affinity for your brand, we can give them the best promotions in the world, and we might actually succeed in getting them to buying off their second purchase, but it's going to be very, very hard to win their loyalty in a meaningful way down the road. And so we like to pause on this just for a second, because it's easy to demonize promotions and be critical of the instinct that leads to them being used so widely. But in reality, we tend to see a lot of CRM folks thinking about questions which are worthwhile and which we'll address a little later, like how do we get customers to engage with our brand not just once, but on a repeated basis and drive long-term loyalty. So if we're going to provide a meaningful framework or blueprint for solving the reliance on price promotions, it's probably helpful for us to take a step back and do some root causing. Like, what are the reasons that retailers are led, pressured into promoting so aggressively? When we go out and talk to retail executives and leaders, largely in the C-suite of the retailers that we work with, we've actually kind of broken down, clustered the rationale that we hear into 3 reasons, which actually have pretty separate fixes or solutions associated with them. And that's the framework that I'd like to encourage folks on the webinar today to think about a little bit. The first reason, and we saw this largely with the markdown numbers that we looked at earlier, is a mismatch between supply and demand. We have overbought into certain product categories and we're incurring inventory carrying costs. We need to liquidate our inventory so that we can make room for new stuff. That's a really, really common reason for promotions. These are the types of promotions that are often ideated and optimized by the merchandising team in partnership with marketing. And so there's a whole playbook or set of tactics that we can introduce to help us optimize around inventory planning, so that we don't find ourselves in this reactive position of having to liquidate merchandise at less than full price just to make way for the new collection. Something that we hear quite often, especially around this time of year, is the pressure is getting ratcheted up, not only in the performance marketing space where CPAs on Google search ad terms and CPMs on display inventory are being fought over like never before. But when it comes to discounting, and discounting particularly as a weapon used in the competitive arms race, we've got some great case studies and a nice playbook here for how we respond when we find that competitors in our industry are ratcheting up the pressure and particularly using price as a lever to do so. And then the last one, I couldn't think of a more scientific way to put this, is just like, we want to grow. Like, we, as a retailer, we're either beholden to public markets because we're a publicly traded company, or our management is just under pressure to do what every company under the sun is trying to do, to hit our comps and actually increase revenue year over year. And so what I'd like to do is walk you through some of the best practices that we've gleaned from working with the world-class retailers in our portfolio. And for each of these, the framework or orientation that we're going to try to adopt here is a short-term solution and a long-term solution. The long-term solutions are admittedly idealistic, they're aspirational, and we'll point to some great examples of retailers who have really changed the game by doing business differently in their respective industries. Folks like Zara and Crocs, who have kind of turned the dominant model of discounting on its head. It's very difficult for me sitting in my shoes, in my seat, to recommend that we immediately go from 0 to 60. So stop doing business the way you are today and immediately make a transformational shift to leverage customer insights for merch allocation the way that Zara is. As a result, kind of sipping our own Kool-Aid and our own approach, we tend to focus on a staged approach where we pick off some of the low-hanging fruit first. What are the relatively low level of effort tactics that retailers like you can adopt in order to begin chipping away at the problem we often talk about this as a crawl, walk, run approach when we work with the retailers in our portfolio, which is let's start by getting something in place and then iterating, increasing sophistication until we get to that amazing aspirational end state where we're running a marathon, just like our friends at Zara. But so let's dive in, and for each of these, again, we'll start with kind of the short-term quick fix, things that you can do today, whether or not you have Kastora as your customer intelligence platform, and then the long-term more focused on what the steady state might look like for a really high-performing, customer-obsessed organization. Okay, so we've got extra inventory. We're a vertically integrated specialty retailer, and we have overbought in knit tops, and we need to clear them out in order to make way for our fall/winter arrivals. What do? Many of the retailers that we work with, I mean, this is a common position that they find themselves in. This is like every marketer's worst nightmare, because the marketing team typically has, spent months building, refining, optimizing, testing their way into the marketing calendar, and all of a sudden we've got an ask from the merch team to feature product X or Y. It's a markdown. We got to move this inventory. More often than not, the tactics that we see retailers resorting to are kind of indiscriminate one-size-fits-all batch and blast. So got to move those knit tops. They're 25% off. Let's create a quick marketing blast and send it to everybody in the customer base. The challenge that we see with this is going back to kind of the customer habituation. Sure, we're going to scoop up some demand amongst customers who may have an interest in this category, but at the same time, we're training all of our customers, including those for whom a knit tops message is utterly irrelevant, to expect that our merchandise is going to be discounted eventually. So they should just wait for a discount. And so in an ideal world, what we would like to do is laser target the customers that we anticipate will respond to this message, who A, have an affinity for knit tops, and B, may only respond to this merchandise on discount or markdown, and put our message in front of those customers. And that's exactly the playbook that we would recommend adopting here. Quick plug for Kastora, although this is not a Kastora specific tactic, partially because we've seen that this is such a universal phenomenon with the retailers trying to strike the right balance between merch needs and marketing wanting to be respectful of customer preferences. We've developed some really nice predictive models that help us understand on the individual level how likely a customer is to respond to a particular category and whether they're willing to buy that category at full price or only on markdown. And so working with a well-known vertically integrated specialty retailer, we helped them transition from a batch and blast approach to merchandise markdown messaging to laser targeting those customers on a regular basis for whom that message was relevant. And what they were able to do was capture essentially 100% of the sales that they would have otherwise, while keeping a tighter lid, tighter circulation on their promotional messaging, essentially not habituating the entire customer base to anticipate those kinds of markdowns. What I would invite you to think about, whether or not you are a current Kastora customer, is what are the tools that you have at your fingertips to help you start implementing similar tactics today. Perhaps you don't have a fancy pants mathematical model, machine learning driven to anticipate individual user preferences, but looking at, hey, who has bought this category in the past, potentially on markdown? That's a great starting point to figure out who this message is likely to resonate with and see how much of that demand we can sop up in place of having to spray and pray to the whole customer base. Now, you may be able to infer just the way I'm talking about this, we think of this as a reactive tactic. So we've already gone through our merchandise, our design process, our merchandise planning and buying process. This is a tactic that helps us level out supply and demand in cases where we've got more supply and we need to drive targeted demand for a specific category. But of course, again, thinking in our super optimistic, idealistic way, what would really be great is if we could even out supply and demand. If we could basically have perfect foreknowledge of what categories, what styles, what silhouettes, what fabrics, what fits are likely to resonate with our customer base, and place our buys accordingly in a really data-driven way. And so the aspirational case study that we always turn to as a kind of industry-leading example of scraping customer data and insights from unexpected sources is Zara. Zara is world-renowned for the speed and agility of its supply chain. So the ability to, I'm going to be a little salty here, but like knock off styles from the runways within weeks and bring them to store. But what I think is deeply underappreciated is that they actually have a wonderful infrastructure in place for capturing customer feedback and customer preferences. They're doing that online based on trends in social media, what customers are searching, what looks are trending and going viral from the upstream fashion weeks in London and Milan. They're doing this in store based on what inventory is moving off the shelves, the feedback that their store associates are capturing from their customers. And all of those inputs are being used to inform smarter design and buying decisions. Now, when we look internally to the retailers within Kastora's portfolio who are best positioned to stave off having to discount in the future, they're using customer preferences to even out supply and demand kind of the last mile once the buys have already been made. But they're actually looking at things like the customer segments that are growing most in size year over year and how customer preferences are changing. We've got some nice insights tools within Kastora that enable us to see, hey, our high value customers are predicted to grow 10% year over year, and we're expecting that they're going to buy products X, Y, and Z. Or meanwhile, our millennials, a big segment last year, tends to be dropping off, and we see because they're moving away from categories A, B, and C. Integrating that sort of predictive line of sight into customer preferences, what customers are likely to demand tomorrow, is a great way to avoid getting into a kind of reactive discounting jam when we've got a mismatch between supply and demand. Okie dokie, competitive pressures. Maddie and I were talking about this earlier. This is like how do we bring a gun to a knife fight, if that's the expression, or how do we bring a gun? It was something about, we don't like violent analogies, but basically, how do we match and win when our competitors are engaging in self-destructive behavior around price promotion? This is especially common again around holiday time, a very promotional time of the year. That's going back to that Google search trend chart where we see the big spikes right around holiday time. A great example of this is a retailer that we've worked very deeply with over the years, Crocs. Crocs is a consummate success story in the retail space. They've seen tremendous growth in their valuation year over year. But a lot of this came from a mandate that was issued to their team a couple of years ago around better discount conservation or margin conservation. Crocs had historically been a very, very promotional brand. And for the first time, as they were beginning to settle into their role as a D2C e-commerce provider, their management team was thinking about how do we kind of earn customer loyalty and drive sales while giving away less margin. The way that Kastora helped them kind of be able to remain competitive, and in some cases competitive not just with direct competitors, but with channel partners. So the folks that they're selling to on a wholesale basis who are bidding against them in search terms and going up head to head against them in the inbox was through surgical use of Kastora's predicted discount sensitivity segmentation. So the idea is basically this, right? Imagine that we were able to understand on the individual level for every customer in the customer base how much of a discount they need in order to drive that conversion. For some customers, that would probably be pretty high, right? Like Maddie, for example, might not buy unless she's getting at least a 50% discount on her order. What absolutely shocked and floored the Crocs team, because they had always been a very historically promotional brand, when Kastora ran this analysis on their customer base, was how darn large the segment of customers was who would be willing to buy a product at close to full price. using some nice lookalike modeling, we were able to tease out kind of the attributes and behaviors that were most predictive of a user's likelihood to shop full price, and actually discovered this was a pretty sizable chunk of customers. And what they realized, armed with this knowledge, was that they could go head to head against their competitors for the customers who were really on the fence. The customers who needed that deep discount in order to convert, they could get in front of those customers when they were on the website, in email, with an absolutely compelling best in market offer off of Crocs merchandise. And they could actually afford to do that because they were peeling back on their level of promotionality with the customers who didn't need a discount in order to convert. And so it was really the two sides of the coin that worked together to help them drive results. For those customers who were more driven by newness and a brand message, they were able to focus on their full price offerings. And for those customers who were we would argue more kind of at risk of being lost in the competitive pool, they were able to get in front of them with an incredible discount. But the net of this was a big lift in ROI and in revenue per user by tailoring kind of the right level of discount promotionality to the individual user across channels. This is amazing as again, reactive tactic, a short-term solution. And this is something where, similar to the last tactic that we briefed, it's great if you have fancy math that you can use, a customer intelligence platform like a Cursora. By no means is that a prerequisite for rolling out a tactic like this. As long as you have your customer data consolidated to the point where you can run some basic historical analytics on, hey, who are the customers who tend to buy in the 0 to 20% discount range off of MSRP, or the 20 to 40% discount range. You can begin to do some nice blocking and tackling around how you message those customers in email, on the website, when they call into the customer care center. Of course, again, this is a tactic that we would describe as kind of a short-term fix. Ultimately, what we'd like to move to is a more sustainable kind of long-term solution so that we need less discounting. And we're getting into fewer of these knife fights that we want to bring a gun to over the customers who are deciding between us and a competitor. I always cringe when I present this slide because it sounds so darn glib. In reality, the only effective tactic that we've seen for driving long-term loyalty, such that we don't need to resort to competitive promotion tactics, is developing a more unique value proposition for your brand. Don't worry, I'm going to say additional things about that rather than just leave that as a cliffhanger. But the idea is basically this. When we look at some of the brands, both in the Cursora portfolio and also outside of it, that are growing really fast today, it's actually not by thinking big that they've done so. It's by thinking really small, right? Rather than trying to be all things to all people, they've honed in with surgical precision on a segment of customers with a real problem that they can solve in a unique and compelling way. We would say kind of the disruptive industry game changers like Casper for mattresses, Quip for dental equipment, Warby Parker for glasses, as brands that have intentionally adopted this think small to grow big strategy, zooming in on a target segment of customers that is underserved in some way, and offering them a very slimly tailored but deep value proposition. We see this with amazing brands like Everlane and MM LaFleur. We've just called this out here. MM LaFleur, it would have been very tempting as a women's wear brand to go after all women in the 18 to 35 range and offer all occasion wear. And instead, they walked a much narrower path, zooming in on a particular segment of underserved women, particularly the professional set looking for affordable and stylish workwear. They've intentionally remained laser targeted on the segment for which they have a unique value proposition. And that's enabled them to actually grow much faster than retailers with kind of a broader vision or mandate. Now, Maddie and I were arguing a little bit about this beforehand, like, is this only a viable strategy for new retailers? What about retailers that are kind of burdened with a legacy of trying to be many things to many customers? We've actually got some wonderful examples of what we would think of as legacy retailers, both omnichannel and pure play e-commerce, who have managed to stave off a reliance on discounting by offering a really unique value proposition and explicitly not competing on price. And the example that always comes to mind for me is Zappos, a brand that has over the years achieved almost a epic industry lauded lack of reliance on discounting and promotion by changing the game around what the value is that they're providing to their customers. I mean, they're not just narrowly a shoe wear or footwear retailer. They compete on the dimension of service and convenience and quality. And that's enabled them to carve out a competitive position that is differentiated from other retailers focusing more on the price angle. And so while it may never be fully possible to establish a high ground that is fully insulated or where there's an insuperable moat from competitors, what we like to encourage the retailers that we work with to think of is what is the segment of customers that has such a deep and searing pain point that you are uniquely positioned to help out. If you find that niche, that segment of customers, chances are that they will absolutely be willing to pay full price for you, and you won't have to fight over discount dollars for them with the competition. So think small to grow big is the long-term fix here. And then increasing revenue. This is like the garden variety, why do you discount answer, is that we all want to drive more revenue year over year, hit our comps, achieve our earnings targets if we're publicly traded companies. And so the short-term solution here, again, thinking in this mindset of how do we avoid customer habituation? How do we avoid the customers getting settled into this mindset of waiting for promotions? That if you think back to the first generation of abandoned cart messages, right? The standard playbook was, if somebody doesn't convert when they've got something in their cart, wait 24 hours and then send them something with a promotion in it. This basically taught a generation of e-commerce shoppers to put something in their cart and then not buy it and wait 24 hours to expect that promotion. And so the types of short-term solutions that we tend to advocate for the generic increasing revenue goal are creative structuring and variation of promotions such that customers don't get used to or locked into expecting a particular promotional offer. We see this coming to life in a couple of different ways with the retailers that we work with. We've called out a couple here. Number one, tiered offers. Great option because they have some aspirational upsell involved in them as well. If they have the nice benefit of increasing the number of items per order and overall growing AOV. So at the same time that they are providing a promotional incentive, they're helping us grow our e-commerce metrics, our store metrics from the customer economics perspective. Bounce back offers similarly a nice structure to adopt, again, as a short-term reactive tactic for promotions, because in addition to driving promotional incentive, they encourage customers to come back and make that second purchase. So thinking about the increasing rate of customer loyalty from one purchase to two purchase to three purchase, if we believe that there is some beneficial impact of having a customer exposed to our brand more, coming back and making that second purchase, just getting them to come through the door and transact again can be very helpful. One promotional tactic, which we're kind of cheating here, doesn't necessarily even need to be promotional in nature, is experiential rewards. So things that carry disproportionate value to the customer because they make them feel valued, unique, special, but don't necessarily have a financial cost for the retailer. The most effective experiential rewards that we've seen are things like expedited shipping promotions, upgrades on shipping and fulfillment, assistance from a personal shopper in a one-to-one way. Heck, I don't know why I'm talking about this. Why don't we just take a look at some of what the experts are doing? What we're seeing here are some of the really creative tactics that retailers have adopted with this kind of reactive mindset of, gosh, we know that discounting or driving promotions is not a long-term sustainable strategy. How do we create excitement and drive additional purchases in the short term without habituating our customers to expect that we're always going to be 20% off and then we're going to have to go to 25%. So some nice examples from both within the Custora portfolio as well as outside of it, varying the structure, the level, and the levers of the discount and promotion. Okay, I wish there were a silver bullet here, but there's not. So instead, I will give you three titanium bullets, three bronze bullets. Really, as unfun as it is to be the bearer of this news, the truth of the matter is that when we talk to retailers about growing revenue, not just in the short term like this week, but this month, this year, over the next 2 or 3 years, the strategies that we advocate are fundamentally a return to the basics of good business practices. For customer-centric retailers, they've kind of got an edge, a leg up in this regard because they're already thinking about, acquiring higher value customers, aligning their acquisition dollars. So, the money they're spending in search and display and social with the types of channels and tactics that are bringing in customers who are going to make 6 repeat purchases and not just be one and done customers. And on the retention side, thinking about, hey, how do we drive more value and more long-term loyalty from our highest value customers? How should we be reaching out to them at the right time, at key inflection points in the life cycle to get them to come back? These types of customer-centric retailers are thinking about this certainly from a marketing perspective, so acquiring better customers, retaining those customers, but they're actually going bigger than that. They realize, perhaps thinking about some of the evidence that we've cited over the course of this webinar, that although marketing often gets stuck with the brunt of the promo problem, it's actually probably the most cross-functional of all the challenges that a retailer faces. It touches everything from finance, how we go about doing our forecasting and setting our targets and goals for the year, to design, what products are we designing, to merchandise and planning, how much are we buying, how are we allocating it across stores. Promos and discounting are really a company-wide problem or challenge. And so the most effective retailers are the ones that are actually integrating insights on their best customers and their customer segments across all of these teams, helping merch make better buys and better decisions about what products to merchandise on in the store and on the page based on customers, using predicted customer lifetime value to do really robust bottom-up financial forecasting rather than pie in the sky, top-down wishful forecasting that leads to some of the promotions that we've talked about. So let's do a deep dive into what this actually looks like in practice. We're going to go back to our good friends over at Crocs. They're awesome in so many ways, but in addition to kind of cracking the nut on how to put more targeted, relevant messaging in front of customers based on discount sensitivity, they took a page from the book here and said, hey, we actually want to start by acquiring higher value customers who have more of an innate preference and affinity for our brand and are likely to come back and drive more repeat purchases in the future. Historically, they'd been doing a lot of their acquisition on kind of a minimized CPA basis. So how do we acquire the maximum number of customers for as inexpensively or as efficiently as possible? Custora came in and said, hey, there's actually a better way to do this. Imagine that we could go out and find more customers like your highest value customers, the type of folks who don't seek discounts whenever they come to the site, the types of customers who come in and buy not just your core merchandise, but Jibbitz and apparel and kind of the full range of products in your portfolio. And we actually started using Custora's predicted lifetime value segments in order to drive lookalike modeling across all of their channels. Facebook, Google, display. They were actually able to see such a bonkers improvement in their return on ad spend that Ben Hemphill kind of embarrassingly said, you wouldn't believe it if I told you. But the reality is, again, whether you're using Custora to tease out who is likely to be a high value customer in the future, or you're running your own in-house analytics to analyze historical behavior, the use of lookalike modeling tools within the acquisition ecosystem with the goal of acquiring more high value customers who are going to prevent the need for you to do discounting down the line. That's a great way to tackle this problem, kind of at the root, rather than waiting for more of these reactive kind of last mile fixes. Another great way to approach the challenge of driving growth, from a truly customer-centric perspective at a high level, is to focus on, as cheesy as it sounds, communicating with the right customers at the right time, with the right message. Wolverine, the footwear conglomerate, is actually a great example of this, using Costora to really understand the preferences and expected future behavior of different customers within their customer base. They've driven an incredible year-over-year growth. A lot of it is coming from full price type behavior and shopping. And the reason for that is once they've acquired a high value customer, they really maximize the LTV of that customer by reaching out to them at key inflection points in the life cycle, talking to them about products that are relevant, and continuing to drive kind of that dialogue with them over time so that they're nurturing them as a part of the brand. A great example of kind of the third leg of the stool, prong of the fork here, integrating customer insights into all business operations, not just marketing, is the hyper growth team over at Bonobos, disruptive menswear apparel recently acquired by Walmart. Bonobos a couple of years ago had this absolutely bananas idea. Like, you would have listened to them say it and think it was just the craziest idea in the world, which was, at the same time that every retailer under the sun was closing doors, all of these historically overextended omnichannel retailers were trying to minimize their retail footprint and go fully online. Bonobos had this idea: what if we took our pure play e-commerce business with its minimal overhead, no real estate costs or debt financing or anything like that, and what if we opened physical stores? It sounded like the craziest idea in the world to us at the time, but we went along with them for the ride. Talking with their planning team and their store operations team, what we quickly realized was, this was a massive investment in capital expenditures for them. They were opening their first guide shop here in New York, where real estate prices are notoriously not inexpensive. And so in order for this to be a viable engagement channel for them, from an acquisition standpoint and retention standpoint, the customers that they touched through their guide shop, that they brought to the brand for the first time, for example, would have to be literally an order of magnitude more valuable than the traditional acquisition channels that they ran through the digital space: paid search, social display. And it was a big bet for them. Using Costora, they were able to really, really rapidly evaluate the LTV, the lifetime value of the customers who came through the guide shop. And honestly, much to my surprise, and I think the surprise of the entire Costora team here, what they found was that this crazy strategy of having basically a window shopping experience that they staged for their customers, it paid off in spades. The customers who came through their guide shop were incredibly more valuable and more loyal than the customers who had come through traditional digital channels. And it was because they got to engage with the brand in a more tangible, real way. They got to try on the products. They got to talk to experienced customer service ninjas, as they call them on the Bonobos side, really understand the brand heritage. And so this incredible risk that we all thought was like, Bonobos going out of their minds, paid off to the point where they rapidly rolled out a store expansion strategy across the country, expanding into key markets like San Francisco, Chicago, using Costora's predictive insights to target the markets where they should expand, because they had big clusters of high potential value customers, to the point where now they've got a retail footprint in over 50 markets nationwide, and this is a key part of their growth strategy. And so this is an example of a retailer that managed to take insights on their most valuable customers, lifetime value of different customer segments, and really permeate those through the decision making of a cross-functional team of executives spanning planning, finance, store operations, and marketing. And when we look to the retailers who are best positioned to fight the discount battle in the long run, while there are some great kind of reactive tactics like the ones that we've glossed over, it's really the ones who are focusing on the long-term fundamentals of their business, acquiring higher value customers, retaining and growing customer relationships over time, and propagating customer insights into all of their retail operations. Those are the ones that we feel like have the best chance of winning that battle. And so, just to gloss some of the key takeaways here, we highlighted some of the data up front around how rampant promotionality and the rising use of promotions to drive sales is hurting retailers from a gross margin standpoint, habituating customers to expect that, and ultimately leading to devaluation of brand equity and brand loyalty in the long run. However, it's not all gloom and doom and an apocalypse. We looked into the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, which is that insights gleaned from customer data can help us address the problem, both from a short-term solution standpoint. Once we've got a gap, let's say, between supply and demand, or we're falling short of our growth goals, how do we strategically and surgically deploy customer insights in order to close the gap and drive growth in the healthiest way, the way that has the least deleterious effect on our customer health in the long run. And then from a long-term perspective, how do we organize our business and set ourselves up for success to mitigate the need for discounting in the first place? We do that in a couple of ways by using customer insights to influence not just marketing communications, but to help provide kind of a true north around planning and merchandising. What products are we stocking and how much of them are we buying into? To carve out a more unique value proposition for a core segment that has a desperately searing pain point and need for our product. And then focusing on core business fundamentals, using customer lifetime value to organize our acquisition efforts, to grow lifetime value through smart retention activities, and to make kind of cross-functional business and leadership decisions. And as always, it's very much in our brand DNA at Costura, and the companies that we've seen scaling this approach most successfully, rather than trying to do it all on day one and jump to that promised land of Zara and Crocs and MM LaFleur, to adopt a crawl, walk, run approach where we put into market some modest kind of reactive tactics, sell internally the success of those tactics, show how we're achieving our goals while protecting the business and protecting our customer equity. And over time, align more and more stakeholders and business owners around the outcomes that we want to achieve and the use of customer data and insights to drive those. So those are some of the lessons from the front line. I know we've covered a lot of ground. I'm going to take a pause here. We've got a few minutes for any questions from the audience. Let me turn it over to you, Maddie.
Sure. So let me just take a look at the questions that have come in while Jordan was talking. And if you guys do have any more, feel free to keep chatting them. Okay, so here's the first one. So we talked about how these kind of newer D2C e-commerce first retailers have really focused, or what did we call it? Think small to grow big.
We're still workshopping that.
Yeah, we think it sounds kind of good. So it's pretty easier for them when they've already really narrowly defined who their target market is. But for some of these legacy retailers, where it's not as easy to very quickly decide, okay, now we're just going to focus on this very core target group of people, and assuming that they're facing all of the challenges we talked about. They're trying to grow revenue, they're facing competitive pressures, they're trying to push inventory, which I think everyone is. What would you recommend as kind of the first tactic or strategy that they implement to try to mitigate this?
So it's a
challenge.
It's a good question. This is basically the come on, stop BS and get real about the think small to grow big mandate that we gave to the brands out there. So part of the Costura playbook, when we start working, especially with legacy retailers who are, I don't want to make it sound negative, but saddled with this challenge of needing to be all things to all customers, having a very broad-based, heterogeneous customer base. Typically, these are vertically integrated legacy retailers operating across multiple channels. Part of the Costura playbook, is as simple as this sounds, is to do a deep dive into who our most valuable customers are. This is often eye-opening for brands, and I'll just cite one example here of an omnichannel legacy retail brand that we work with out in California. This is a brand that for some time has been competing in what I would call the aspirational mainstream sector of the market. They're kind of competitive with, let's say, Michael Kors and Coach to some extent in the accessories category, with J. Crew and Gap in the apparel category. And for a long time, management at this retailer had a pretty clear idea of who their ideal customer, their most valuable customer was. It was, a woman married with 2 kids who had income of $100,000 a year and was based in, metropolitan areas. And this was the true north that they used for making basically all brand decisions, where they should locate their stores, so their real estate footprint, their advertising and creative strategies. When Costura came in and actually did a bottom-up deep dive into their customer base, what we found shocked the entire management team. What we found was that this idea of their ideal customer had been largely shaped by wishful thinking and kind of an aspirational kind of management ideation of who the ideal customer was. In reality, the customer who had the strongest resonance with the brand was a single mother living in generally the inner city, who had income below $50,000 a year, and for whom the most affordable parts of the accessories merchandise line represented like an unbelievable splurge. But that was her gateway to the brand and getting a piece of the brand promise. And this exercise was really, really helpful. And outside of just being fun to have a conversation about the gulf between how we see our brand and how customers see our brand, it really enabled them to sharpen their messaging, to think about products that were priced appropriately for that target persona, to think about how they could actually grow the number of purchases per year and the loyalty of that customer persona. And I think that's kind of the unlock that we try to promote when we work with these big brands, is that they actually often have the engine of growth within their customer base, customers who have so much more potential, where we're capturing a small share of wallet. But if we spoke to them in a more tailored way, if we delivered products and services at the right price that were unique to them, it would result in unbelievable growth. That's the first step to moving away from this mentality of we have to be all things to all people, is to paint a very clear picture of the growth opportunities when we start by focusing smaller on these key segments that we might not even know exist within the customer base.
Awesome. Well, we are actually out of time for today because you're so passionate about this, Jordan.
I'm very passionate about this.
Longer than I thought it would. Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. Please do email us if you have any questions, and expect the recording and a very short survey to come. We'd really appreciate if you fill that out so we can keep making these webinars better. And have a great rest of the day, and happy holidays.
Thank you so much. Happy holidays.